I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this is long overdue. I should have talked about this movie the day I saw it. Throughout the years, I have seen some really bad movies. Food Fight, Manos, The Hands of Fate, Jack and Jill, Movie 43, so many. And all of them were an absolute chore to sit through. But I found it. The worst movie that I've ever seen in my life. I'm amazed how bad it is. Even if there are possibly worse out there, nothing I've seen will ever top the atrocity that I've witnessed. And I'm referring to the independent science fiction drama, Fateful Findings. This has to be the most incompetent, incoherent, lifeless, and disastrous flick I've ever had the misfortune of laying my eyes on. And never have I felt so ashamed of seeing a movie this embarrassingly poor. I mean, how can anyone fail this abysmally at filmmaking? The worst directors currently working in Hollywood could put together a better and more comprehensible story in their dreams than Neil Breen, the director, producer, writer, editor, and star of the disaster piece known as Fateful Findings. But you guys are probably wondering, what about this film makes it so bad? Well, I'm about to tell you. To start off, the biggest problem with Fateful Findings lies in its story, or lack thereof. There kinda is one, but it's so hard to follow. Not because this is one of those complicated films like Inception or Donnie Darko, but mainly because there is no sense of coherency in this flick. We start off with what seems to be about a boy named Dylan and a girl named Leia playing, and they come across a black stone that has some sort of magic power. You might think the explanation of the stone is further explained, but it's done in such a confusing and vague manner that you're still left half-baked from whatever this thing is even supposed to be in the first place. Even as the film went on, I still couldn't figure a thing about the stone, and I practically gave up caring. Anyway, Dylan, all grown up, is now a writer living with his wife, and he got out of the hospital from a car accident, and then that scene is forgotten about. Yeah, another problem with the movie, several scenes that look like they'll serve an important role go almost nowhere. Dylan is in the hospital, and then the scene ends and goes nowhere. Dylan and his wife invite their friends over for dinner, and the scene ends and goes nowhere. Dylan's neighbor's daughter tries seducing him, and the scene ends and goes nowhere. Dylan gets rid of these pills that his wife has for some reason, the scene ends and goes nowhere. The only elements that kinda go somewhere are that Dylan meets his former childhood friend Leia after so many years, and they kinda sorta show some affection, and Dylan also being a vigilante hacker who exposes the most secret government and corporate secrets. But even with those, the former ends up being blander than rice cakes without much care given, and the latter is barely looked upon and feels almost pointless. I don't remember entirely, but I think they brought both up about 3 or 4 times, maybe not even. And believe me when I say that this film didn't even attempt to resolve the former. Sure, the latter was kinda resolved, but it botched up its point so much that I was left wondering why it was even there in the first place, even when I tried remembering it. Essentially, Fateful Findings is one of those movies that has scenes that look like they serve the plot, but they go pretty much nowhere, and you wonder why they were even there in the first place, thus feeling like the movie has a half-baked plot. Now, why does that sound so familiar? Speaking of which, that brings me to my next point, the editing. This film has the same problem as Manos, The Hands of Fate by padding scenes on too long that shouldn't even be that long in the first place, causing the movie to be an absolute bore fest. However, where Manos was at least easy to follow due to its basic storyline, this schlock doesn't even try to make its story comprehensible. The plot is so poorly constructed thanks to the sporadic editing that the movie can't even decide whether to focus on one thing or the other. Because of this, it leaves so much to be desired and me wondering what any of this magical stuff from the beginning is even supposed to mean, or what is going on in the film as a whole. Also, since the film can't decide what to focus on or how to handle in the first place, I ended up caring about none of the characters or what happens to them. So whenever their dilemmas are occurring, I can't for the life of me even attempt to follow because of how muddled the pacing and structure of the movie is. Case in point, the subplot revolving around Dylan's neighbor, who at the beginning being dismissed by his wife because she doesn't want to hang with him as much as before, yet later on, as he's working on his car, she complains that he spends more time on her car than her. Did we miss a scene? Either show more of these characters or just remove them from the story completely. Nothing will change at all. I don't know if it's because there was only one editor in this whole thing, but either way, Neil Breen clearly has no idea how to put together his own movie in an understandable or cohesive way. I'd say it's pretty sad when I can edit a movie in iMovie better than anything this guy can edit, but do I really need to state the obvious? Now it's time to talk about the acting, which might be the worst I've ever seen. None of the actors convey proper emotions or believable deliveries. They either sound lifeless or look lifeless for that matter, and not once did I ever buy that they were in the mode of how their characters should function. Don't even get me started on the extras. I think the alleged director found a bunch of random civilians with no experience in acting, told them what little they had to do or say, and took one take for every scene. The best performance is from a doctor, since it gives me the impression they recorded an actual doctor while the director was at a real-life appointment. It's just too bad that he only appears twice. However, the worst actor by far is the guy responsible for conducting this failed disaster and playing Dylan himself, Neil Breen.
Is that even a real name?
Not only does this guy make Tommy Wiseau, Uwe Boll, and Ed Wood look like accomplished filmmakers, but his performance is so bland, so lifeless, so uncharismatic, unconvincing, awkward, and embarrassing that he deserves to win the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Actor every single year. Even if he's not in a film every year, it's gotta be like the worst performance I've ever seen. You could make the argument that his performance is so bad it's funny, but here's the thing. With others so bad they're good performances like Johnny from The Room, Torgo from Monos, the guy who played Cool Cat, hell, even Christopher Walken in almost anything he's in, there's a sense of charm and energy from them that makes them enjoyably awful, and their presence is so ridiculous that it's impossible not to crack up at them. With Neil Breen in Fateful Findings, though, he gives no sense of energetic charm or even life for that matter. If anything, the score gives more life than he does. Too bad half of it is recycled over and over again like The Room. Oh, by the way, since this is part science fiction, yes, there are a few special effects in this, and they are pretty cheap and lackluster. But they barely serve any purpose, and they're never even explained. Also, the way the film handles the tie between Dylan's wife and childhood love is that while Dylan and Leia are out smooching by a field, his wife dies from an overdose of some never-mentioned drug, and then he saves Leia from some kidnappers. Yeah, no movie. You can't just cut from scene to scene unless you focus on the first one more. Otherwise it makes you feel rushed and unfinished. Seriously, did Breen even read a book on filmmaking? However, the scene I must mention now is actually the scene that made me call this the worst movie I've ever seen. How does the subplot of Dylan's neighbor resolve itself? His wife holds him at gunpoint while he works on his car, then she accidentally shoots him after intending to shoot the car. Then their daughter sees this and... Ugh. You know what? Screw it. I'm gonna let the scene speak for itself.
Dad! No! Allie! Dad! Don't go in there! Dad! Don't look! Dad! Dad! You didn't see anything! Dad!
And guess what? That scene goes absolutely nowhere! We don't even see what happens to the wife and daughter afterwards! Bravo, Breen. Bravo. Way to just completely throw them out! When I watched this scene, I immediately said that this was the worst film I had ever seen. How can anyone say okay to a scene like that after it's done being shot, let alone pass it off in the script? I feel so sorry for the people having to perform that scene, as I don't think they had any experience in filmmaking or acting, thus giving them the most embarrassing moments of their lives. Recorded, no less! So overall, Fateful Findings is the biggest failed experiment of a film I've ever seen. The story is incoherent, about half the scenes come and go with barely any purpose, the characters are half-dimensional, the acting is one at best, the music is bland and recycled, the effects are cheap and below average, it can't decide when to cut some scenes, it has nothing deserving of a theatrical release, or even direct-to-DVD for that matter. And I wouldn't mind this too much, I really wouldn't, except this actually played at a film festival. A film festival! People deserve better than lazy garbage like this. And you know the main reason I called this the worst film? Because films like The Room, Food Fight, Monos, and Movie 43, as horrendous as they were, at least offered some enjoyment due to how bad and ridiculous they were. It gave me some kind of impression that they could have worked. And they were made by people who, at the very least, had some idea of how filmmaking works. Oh yeah, and I could gather what was going on in all of them. Fateful Findings gave me more pain and anguish than enjoyment, had nothing creative or even memorable, and lacked any indication of what it was trying to do. It was a nothing movie, and I even wonder to this day if Neil Breen even cared about what he was making in the first place. Now, I understand this has been regarded as a cult film. You know, one of those so bad it's good flicks. You know, like, well, pretty much those bad movies I mentioned. And to an extent, yeah, they're kind of right when they say that. This film is so incompetently made, poorly written, woodenly acted, and just so choppy in all the editing, that it's actually kind of funny the more you watch it. But here's why I didn't laugh at that film. When you're trying to tie all these plot points together, it just leaves me so confused with what you're trying to do. It just makes me wonder, if you're trying to make this one movie and just tie them all together, and you're not going to explain it in a cohesive manner, then what's the point? It's not even worth, laughing at, because I'm just so confused with what's going on. Even The Room, I could tell what was going on. Monos, the Dingo Pictures movies. All Fateful Findings left was a giant pile of nothing, not even caring if it did a good job or not. I've heard that Neil Breen is also an architect. Dude, Breen, if you're watching this, stick to architecture! I shouldn't say this, but you don't know how to make movies. So please, no more. Just go stick to that other occupation. Thank you. I'm sure this movie does have a cult fan base, but I'm really not part of it. If anything, I'd rather be part of the cult fan base of movies that I do enjoy, ironically. Thank you very much. So yeah, if you do want to see this film just to see how bad it can really get, by all means go ahead. However, if you really do want to see a much better, so bad it's good flick, and one that's actually comprehensible at that, rather than wasting your time on Fateful Findings like I did, watch The Room or an Ed Wood movie instead. Trust me, it'll be a lot more satisfying than whatever Neil Breen can conjure up.